Hey guys, Coach Logan here again with your game of the week. This was from the Thursday serious matches. Chenyu from PS59 playing white, and Rosie from PS33 playing black. And it started with e4 from Chenyu, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and then the move d4, which is the Scotch game, which is not as common as like bishop c4, bishop b5, the Italian or the Spanish, but it's definitely a good opening, and there's no reason why shouldn't consider playing it. E takes d4, knight takes d4, and here Rosie played a line that's not the most common. This move queen to h4. We'll come back to this in a second. The most common moves, I see most kids play bishop to c5, which is, it's a reasonable move. My personal favorite is knight to f6. That's what I recommend in my my repertoire series on black for playing pawn to e5 against e4. You guys should check that out. I'll be coming out with another installment in that series this week. After knight takes d4, queen h4 is less common than the other moves, but the idea is kind of interesting. Black is attacking this pawn on e4. And after white defends it with knight to c3, black now plays bishop b4, which is reigniting the threat on this pawn on e4. And here, white, I like the way that Chenyu played this. White basically just ignored black's threat on this pawn and said, if you really want to take the pawn, it's going to be your second move with the queen right out of the opening, and maybe that's just wasting too much time. So white played bishop to e2. Black played queen takes e4. Again, notice that this knight is pinned, so it cannot take the queen. But now Chenyu plays the move knight d to b5, and the point is she's threatening to take on c7 there. Which is not the easiest threat in the world to deal with. Black, for instance, in the game, black played bishop takes c3 check. We'll come back to that, but if black plays bishop to a5, white has a tactic here. See if you can figure it out. Okay, I'm going to continue, but you can pause your videos if you want to try to find it. But basically, white would love to take the queen, but can't because the bishop is pinning the knight to the king. But the bishop is also being used to defend c7, which means it's overloaded. So knight takes c7 is quite strong. Now, white is forking the king and the rook, but if the bishop were to take the knight, now we could actually just take the queen and completely winning. So black played instead bishop takes c3, which I think is the main move. B takes c3, and white does not want to take with the knight. White wants to use her knight to continue to attack the c7 pawn, which again, black does not have a great way to deal with the pressure on c7. So she played here king to d8. I will point out again that something like queen e5, it's just not a very stable way to defend this pawn. For instance, I'm not even sure if this is the best move, but just something like f4 would attack the queen. And next up, we're able to take on c7. We can check with the engine here. I'm not actually an expert in this line, as I don't really play the Scotch too much from the white side. But I believe here, after queen to e5, f4 is one of the top choices. g3 is also strong, preparing bishop f4. So both of those would be good options here. Basically, it's hard to keep this pawn defended. So black plays king to d8, which I think is the main move. And now black is saying, okay, my king's in the center, but you don't have any, immediate way to attack it. And then black is up a pawn with no structural damage. So, if things just simplify, if black is able to just trade off pieces and get to an endgame, black should be winning. But that's a very big if, because white has a lot of activity with her pieces. And black's king is caught in the center. So white has every reason to be optimistic about her attacking chances. So here, white just castled. Black played now knight f6, developing the knight, clearing the path for the rook to get in the game. And here, white played... now, actually, I don't love the move that white played here. Here, white played bishop f3, which I don't like very much. This does attack the queen, but it's moving this bishop again when I think we should be trying to include as many pieces in the attack as possible. So I'm not an expert in this line, so it's hard to say what the best move is, but a few moves I was just glancing at that look better than bishop f3 would be, rook e1 looks like the most natural to me, just bringing a rook to the file and preparing, potential bishop moves with a discovered attack on the queen. That certainly looks reasonable. Moving this bishop maybe to e3, just bringing out a new piece looks reasonable. Playing something like rook b1, just getting the rook out looks reasonable. All of those look to me like natural moves, but rook e1 probably the most natural. Instead, bishop f3, it gains a tempo on the queen, but I'm not so clear the bishop is any better here than it was on well, maybe it's better here, but I don't know. I think that we should be getting pieces into this attack. Here, after bishop f3, black played queen f5. It's not totally clear where black should go with her queen either, but queen f5 was played. Bishop takes c6 was played here. And once again, to me, this feels like the wrong course. I really think that white should be trying to get more of her pieces into the attack. So rook to b1 looks good, just defending the knight. Pawn to c4 actually looks reasonable, defending the knight, maybe clearing paths for the dark square bishop to get on a good diagonal. Instead, bishop takes c6 feels like white is starting to rush simplifications with trades of pieces in a position where white should really be keeping it complicated, because the complications will favor white. White has very active pieces. Black's king is caught in the center. If she starts trading pieces off and simplifying the position, well, maybe black's extra pawn will matter. So we get b takes c6 here, knight to d4, hitting the queen, queen to d5. And I think that black has actually done a pretty admirable job stabilizing this, and black's position looks defensible. If they can get maybe one more trade, then they should be doing pretty well. Bishop a3 was played, and now bishop a6 from black, which looks like a good move, just activating this bishop, attacking the rook on f1. Rook to e1, and here, unfortunately for black, Rosie didn't find the best move here. The best move, well, Rosie played the move pawn to c5, which seems quite reasonable. It's attacking the knight, but unfortunately she overlooked a very, very, very nice tactic that Chenyu found. So I'll give you guys a minute a moment to pause your videos if you'd like. I'm going to continue, but keep your videos paused if you want to try to find it. But white found a very nice move here and a fantastic tactic. Rook to e5. And the point is this now attacks the queen. The queen can't take the rook, though, because knight to c6 is a deadly fork, forking the king and the queen, and the pawn is pinned. So this is actually very nasty move, rook to e5. Therefore, here, black should have played the move. So black is worried about this bishop and this rook on this diagonal here, coordinating, for instance, on the e7 square. But black could play d6, which also blocks the bishop and shuts down rook to e5, which is quite important to do. This rook e5 was a big threat, so d6 was necessary. Then maybe pawn to c5 might be more playable. But here, after c5, rook e5, it not only attacks the queen and sets, sort of bait if the queen were to take it, but it's actually also hitting the c5 pawn. So after queen b7, we get rook takes c5. I think rook b1 would also be a solid move, but rook takes c5 was played. Knight to e4, and now knight into c6 check. Again, taking advantage of this pin on the d file, and after king c8, we get knight e7 check, king back to d8, and now rook f5. Note that the bishop is defending the knight. The rook is now coming around to bother the f7 pawn. We get knight takes c3, attacking the queen, so it makes some sense for black. Black is under a huge amount of stress in the position with this attack, but sometimes when you're under a lot of pressure and your king is under a big attack, if you can't find a way to, alleviate the stress, sometimes it does make sense to just grab some material and so you at least have a pawn or two for your suffering. But unfortunately, white's attack really is just too strong. Queen to g4 was played, including the queen in the attack. We get now pawn to g6 attacking the rook, and then another nice move from Chenyu. Rook takes f7 here, knight to d5, and here queen to d4, which is the nice move. I was thinking of queen to d4. now is an active response to this knight to d5, threatening, in addition to threatening the knight with your knight and your queen, you're also threatening the rook on h8. But unfortunately, there's no really good way to deal with all of this. Knight b6 was played, but queen takes h8 is now made. Black could have tried to move the rook, but this knight is just hanging, and here white would just be up a knight with fantastic attacking chances, so white would win regardless. So a really nice game from, congratulations to both players on a nice game. I liked very much this rook to e5 idea from Chenyu. It was a nice little tactical resource. And I just like the way that she played this. I think that the best response to when your opponent brings their queen out early is just to say, okay, I could try to be really careful and hold on to this pawn here, but better is to just play actively and say, you're going to bring your queen out, you're going to get, your position's going to come under a lot of pressure because that's a lot of time you're wasting with your queen. And I think that Chenyu did a very good job in this game. The only improvement I would offer was, instead of bishop f3 and bishop takes c6 so early, I would say rook to e1 I think looks even stronger. And from Black's side, after all this, I think if she had found the move pawn to d6 here, then she would have been surviving. So good game to both players, and I look forward to the games this week.